Hi everyone, I'm Hanovi Schoonover, the Training and Resource Coordinator for Redwind Consulting, and I'd like to welcome you to the webinar. Before we begin, for those who may not know, Redwind is a nonprofit organization that provides tribal technical assistance on a variety of programs, including, but not limited to, housing and homeless services, children and youth, and elder abuse. This ranges from policy review via email to site visits. If you are interested, you can contact me at hanovi@red-wind.net. That's HONOVI at red-wind.net. As the states, this project is supported by grant number 2018 TAAX K003 awarded by the Office of Violence Against Women, U.S. Department of Justice. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official position or policy of the U.S. Department of Justice. This webinar is part of our Tribal College Campus project. Presenting with us today is Raquel DeHerrera. Raquel is Taos Pueblo, Chiricahua Apache, and Mexican descent, has been with Redwind for over 5 years, and is the project coordinator for Redwind's Tribal College Campus Technical Assistance Project. She has been a trainer for the National Tribal Advocate Center and has presented at Redwind's Creating Sister Space Conference, along with the Creating a Safe Space to Heal Conference. Raquel has also provided webinars on documentation within tribal transitional housing programs, safety planning in a transitional housing program, educational groups, and decolonizing trauma. And she has experience working with tribal housing authorities and Native programs nationally with strategic planning, capacity building, trauma-informed care, violence, collaboration, policy and protocol development, and harm reduction. If you have any questions or comments, you can put them into the chat box, the Q&A, or you can raise your hands and we will see that. And I will now turn it over to Raquel.
Great, thank you, Hanovi, for introducing me and hosting this webinar. I want to thank everyone who's come to join us today. Just a little bit about this project, I think is important to kind of talk about. We are funded through the Office of Violence Against Women. This is the Tribal College Campus TA program, our project. And so what we do here at Redwind is we are available for all tribal college campuses and universities. They don't need to be OVW grantees. We're available for technical assistance for all tribal college campuses and universities that would like assistance or guidance or, just support in any capacity of their work on responding to sexual assault on their campus. So that's kind of what we do, what I do as a project coordinator, provide, create webinars such as this one, topics, and also we can provide trainings. So if you're interested, please, we'll have contact information at the end. Please feel free to email me if there's any questions. I think it's important to note, so this webinar, with this project, we had I think it was last week. I've been out of the office for a couple of weeks. So, but the end of July, we had a webinar that was responding to students who disclose that they've been sexually assaulted on campus. And that was geared more, towards faculty and staff who, might have students who come up to them and disclose that they've been sexually assaulted. And so that webinar was kind of guided, and built for faculty and staff. And this webinar right here, we are really focusing on students. So students who have friends who might disclose to them that they've been sexually assaulted, friends who are just, are students just who are really interested in, how do I get involved on campus to end sexual assault on campus or just in the community. So that's kind of what this is geared towards. And I know, if you work at the campus, you are the Dean of Student Services or in any capacity, please feel free. This will be recorded and you can access that. You can email me or Hanovi, or even on our website, redwind.net, and you can access this recording, and you can, distribute it to students, so that they have this information. So I just wanted to go into that little brief description of this webinar. Next slide, please, Hanovi. I do want to start with a content warning. I do this with every training, especially, right now it's sexual assault is a really, really hard topic to talk about, and it can bring, some things that might be really hard. So I want to bring that to the attention, and know that if you need to, please take a step away. Please do that. Give that to yourself. I know one thing that helps me is I kind of position myself to where I can look out a window, just things that you can kind of ground yourself, as this can be a hard topic to talk about and listen, and just to take care of yourself. And if you need anything after, I'm available. So please feel free to take care of yourself. And I like this quote because I think it really represents why we're here today, why we are doing the work that we're doing. It's really trying to heal the harm that has been caused by sexual assault, in our communities. The people that we love, the people that we care about. I think sexual assault impacts us in many ways, even if we are not victims and survivors of sexual assault, we might have aunties, moms, grandmothers, friends, nieces, all of those, nephews, in some capacity, it impacts us. And so, I think it can be hard to talk about this. And, in some communities, it's a little, this topic is one that not a lot of people want to talk about. So I just want to give that content warning. And I want to read this quote by Linda Hogan. It's one of my favorites. Some people see scars, and it is wounding that they remember. To me, they are proof of the fact that there is healing. And I think, that's something that guides me in this work, that, we know that harm has been done through sexual assault, through violence against women, but there's also healing. And, I strive to, there was a great quote by someone, I can't remember her name, but how are you turning poison, into medicine? And for me, it's, providing ways that we can help everyone on their healing process, including our own. We are also healing. So just want to start that off. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and we'll get started. Next slide, please. So I like to start with just some background information, statistics. These are things, tangible things that we can kind of think about and look at and see, kind of the context of what is happening. And this is from the 2016 National Institute of Justice report that came out. Dr. Andre B. Rose kind of gathered all of this information from the survey, the Intimate Partner Survey from, I think it was 2010. And this is what we have, and this is kind of the most current data that we have in amongst American Indian, Alaska Native communities. And it's 56.1% of American Indian, Alaska Native women have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime. So that is in a lifetime. That is, 56% of women, grandmas, aunties, moms, nieces, 56%. And this is, who have, just who has participated in the survey. So there could be more. And then this number, I think, is also really, really important to discuss, that 27.5% of American Indian and Alaska Native men experience sexual violence in their lifetime. Unfortunately, this study does not include, our Two-Spirit LGBTQ relatives in this, so I think that's something unfortunate with that, and hopefully we'll see more data on that. But these numbers are really hard to see. And it's something that I think a lot of advocates who work in, our Native communities, I mean, this really demonstrates what has been said for a long time, that this is, it's really, really extremely prevalent in our communities. And we can, there's a lot of historical context, the social political context that we can look into as to why this has happened. And it's just alarming. And with this same survey, 14.4% of American Indian Alaska Native women and 9.9% of American Indian Alaska Native men experienced sexual violence in the past year. So that number is incredibly high as well. And I think it's important, so we have this context of what's happening in our Native communities. And then we look at, next slide, please, Hanovi. Please, thank you. We look at some campus-specific statistics. And while these statistics aren't specific to tribal colleges and universities, this is kind of, what we see in that we can, I think, safely refer to our, what's happening in our TCUs, as well as looking at this, and maybe, it might even be higher. It might be lower, we don't know, but going back on those NIJ statistics, we can see that these statistics are probably could be higher. But 25% of women while in college will be victims of sexual assault. So that's 25% of women. 21% of transgender, queer, non-conforming college students have been sexually assaulted. That's 21%. And students are at increased risk of sexual assault during their first semester in college. And I think this is an important thing to note, especially as campuses start thinking about, their response to sexual assault. This window, that first semester, as you are, bringing new students in, that fall semester, when you're bringing new students in, that's a critical time to really think about, how are we getting information out to students? How are students, how are students getting the access to, what the resources are and what that response is? We really want to think about that first semester. And this could be very different for our tribal colleges and universities. As we know, we don't have, it's not those traditional students that, it's not, 17, 18-year-olds who are going to college, off to college for the first time, that we see often in our tribal colleges and universities, that they're non-traditional students, that they might be older, they might, they might have a family and have started and, and then decided to go back to school. So thinking about that, that could, it could look different at when we see an increased risk of sexual assault on tribal colleges and universities. But this is what that data, says, kind of uses the, those national numbers and statistics. But, it is something worth noting and think about. And as a campus, it might be something to think about, what does that look like for our campus? So of course, I always share these statistics, and I also realize that things could be very different for our TCUs, and it could be different, there could be variance even within our tribal colleges and universities. So looking at these numbers, we can get an idea, and I think it shows that there's, this urgent need to respond to sexual assault on campus. But it also, it could look very different. Some of these things might look different. And then I think another piece, and I think this is just, all around, that rape and sexual assault victimization of students are more likely to go unreported. And so we do see, sexual assault, and not just in a campus specific environment, that, that can be, often they go unreported, and that can be due to, a lot of things, whether it's rape culture, victim blaming, access to these, to resources. But for campus, this is even, it's even more likely that they're not going to report. And that, there can be some reasons for that. It might be students don't know who to report to. They might not know do I report to a campus? Or, who kind of, what does that look like? And so I think the more we're clear with students, and the more access and information students have, the better. Especially, this webinar is for students who have friends who have been sexually assaulted. If they know who to report to, what their rights are, what rights are for students who have been sexually assaulted, what resources there are, they will more likely, be able to help their friend and help, you know, um, you know, kind of change these numbers of being unreported. At the same time, we have to respect that survivors and victims might not want to report. Ultimately, we, as advocates and as support, we support victims and survivors of sexual assault and their choices that they make. So kind of thinking about these statistics, looking at what's happening in the community, and then when we look at campus, that's a whole other, institution within the community, and has its own layer of statistics and, things that, dynamics that happen on campus. It's really important to think about and know that this is a serious thing that we really need to be talking about, and that students need to have that information. Next slide, please. So getting into some of the impacts of sexual assault, and these, for college students, these can look very different. I think, of course, there's the physical injuries. We know, and I don't have the source at hand, but we know that for Native victims and survivors of sexual assault, there tends to be more physical injuries. There tends to be more, use of weapons and things like that. So thinking about those physical injuries, that's an impact that we have to think about. And where are those resources for that? Are we, is there a sexual assault nurse examiner that's available on campus? And if not, does the campus have a close relationship with a hospital who provides, sexual assault forensic exams, who have specifically trained sexual assault nurse examiners who have been trained specifically to respond to sexual assault medically? So thinking about that, there's physical injuries, of course, pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections, the risk of that, and academic success and retention. So we know that sexual assault can impact, academic success and retention. So, students might have more of a likelihood, who have been victims and survivors, who are victims of sexual assault or survivors of sexual assault, that could impact their academic success or just their school experience. And that's something that we have to think about. So social isolation, especially, I think, if there's not a strong sexual assault response on campus, it could feel very isolating. And that can be very hard. And I think especially during COVID right now, things have been really hard when we think about social isolation, of just students not having, the support of being in the classroom, being near, their fellow classmates, things like that. So it's, even more expounded and exacerbated, that social isolation for victims of sexual assault. And then there's post-traumatic stress disorder. That impact carries through for, a very long time for victims and survivors. So thinking about, we talked about the last webinar, how can faculty and staff acknowledge and identify and students who might be, who might have PTSD. So, these are just some of those impacts. A sense of safety on campus, especially, if a sexual assault has happened on campus. That sense of safety is critical. It's huge. It's, and again, if there's no sense of safety, that might, create some of this self-isolation, not wanting to be around in that campus environment. And then again, academic success and retention. They might not want to go to class. They might not want to be involved in activities that, once gave them joy and, a sense of purpose. So that sense of safety can definitely diminish after a sexual assault has happened. And then suicide ideation. I think that's one that we, sexual assault victims and survivors, that's one that we have to know and know what are the signs, what are some resources out there? How do we provide support that we have? So, and, especially as, friends, I remember, being young and not really, you see kind of on media, whether it's through TV or movies, you kind of get an idea. There's this idea of what, happens to those who have been victims and of sexual assault. But, to really understand what these look like and really be able to, see what is PTSD, what are some mental health impacts of sexual assault, because I think then you kind of see friends might be a little more, some people are more hyper vigilant, they're more there's more anger, there's more pushing people away, and instead I think as friends we might take that personally, or they've changed, or I don't know how to help. If we can kind of see that these are all impacts of sexual violence, then we can kind of show up in a more compassionate way and not take it personally. And we can know that, okay, this is a trauma response, and this is how, it has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with, a sense of safety, a sense of autonomy, and a sense of, just a sense of being has been impacted by the sexual assault. And so that, if we understand that, we can show up in a more human way for our friends. We can show up more in a good way instead of kind of reacting, because I think when we react, our actions might be, we might do something that, unintentionally causes harm, or unintentionally causes, this person maybe isolate from you. So to keep these things in mind is important, and to know this, this information came from, there's a campus sexual assault, suggested policies and procedures by the American Association of University Professors. If you go on this website, there's great resources. And I think it's, even for students, just to kind of get an idea of what are some recommendations, and how, how could I see if my college or university is, what their policies are and what could be improved upon. Because I think students have a tremendous amount of, power. I don't know, I guess it should just be power, and, just they have that on campus where they can go to their president, their dean of student services, they can go to faculty, and say, look, I think here's some guidance on what we should be doing, and I don't know if we're doing that, so how can we improve upon that? So I think students definitely have that power and have that, just that, they're going to be the leaders of change. I think, they are the leaders of change. And so these are great resources to have. Just wanted to put that in there because I know I have it on the bottom of the slide, and could be like, what is the AAUP? But it's the American Association of University Professors. And this came from that work, the suggested policies and procedures. And it has much more information, those impacts of sexual assault, and then, how do we respond as a campus? So, but this is just important, I think, for friends and fellow students and classmates to understand, just to know what this, a person who has been a fellow student who has been sexually assaulted, all of these things that, they could be impacted by, and I think that gives us a little bit more, that human understanding, because I think, we'll talk about rape culture here in a minute, but I think when we don't understand these things, then it's much easier to victim blame. It's much easier to get frustrated. Why didn't they do this? Why did they do this? Well, those aren't great choices they're making, and I've seen it. I've had friends who, have been frustrated with other friends of, well, what were you, what were you thinking? This is a personal story for me, but I remember being at a party and, wanting to rest, and someone, decided that they were going to, without consent, want to touch my body. And I remember freezing for a minute and then telling my friend, we have to get out of here. And I remember the first thing they said was, well, why didn't you say anything? And I know her intention was not to blame me, or, it was more of a confusion of, well, you know, but at the same time, that brings, some blame. It brings some like shame and some like, well, did I do something wrong? Did I, permit, by my lack of, saying no, did that mean, or saying anything, did that mean that I was permitting that? So I think, when we start understanding some of these impacts and we start understanding sexual assault and these dynamics, then we can really show up for our friends in a way that we're not unintentionally causing harm. So I think it's good. And these aren't the only list of impacts. There are many, and it will vary. Some friends will be, they might be that, hyper vigilant. Some might be just completely frozen and not able to, not able to talk about it, or not able to do the things that we would think that we would do in that situation. So, impacts vary. Trauma, looks different for every person. And it's really important to understand that. Next slide, please. So I think, to go back into that rape culture on campus, we know, I think through media, through movies, I think one of the biggest movies that come to my mind is Animal House, or just a lot of these movies that, are based in a campus environment. A lot of sexual assault comes into play. And I think there's a lot of research out there that shows, college campuses, just that environment and that culture around it, toxic masculinity, all of these things, a lot of conditions are in place that allow and perpetuate rape culture on campus. And we see it in more, when we look at nationally, like big college campuses, universities, and while we have this data, again, this could look very, very different for tribal colleges and universities. And I think one of our biggest strengths as tribal colleges and universities is that all campuses are led, with those traditional values, those traditional, thought processes and philosophy that really challenges sexual assault. We know, and I don't want to generalize, and I think Sarah Deer in her The Beginning and End of Rape, it's a great book, and it talks about, we know that, sexual assault never happened, but the way there was accountability, the way, just the way our communities and our, were structured, it was very different. And so I think that's something to think about. But when we look at the bigger picture of, what we see in media, what we see, even in articles that we read, or even in a lot of, news articles that we read, there's this prevalence of rape culture. And what I mean by rape culture are these assumptions. So we think about victim blaming again. Well, why did you do that? Recently, I just moved to Minnesota last year, and recently, a judge had basically said that a woman decided to drink, and so therefore relinquished some kind of consent. And it's just, these are those assumptions, those rape culture ideas that just continuously get perpetuated through all avenues of what's in our culture. So it's interpersonal, in our interpersonal daily day-to-day conversations with, fellow classmates, fellow students, or even just friends, and even our parents who, and our grandparents who might, have these assumptions and ideas about sexual assault. I think about, very recently in the 80s is when it was decided that, through legally decided that men could not rape their wives. And I mean, this is, we're talking 80s here. And so when we think about that impact, our grandparents, it's a whole different thought process of sexual assault. But they just, these assumptions, these myths, they continue. They're those stories that just never go away. It's that constant idea that, well, she went to the party, what did she expect was going to happen? Or she, just that victim blaming, those assumptions that, the victim or survivor made their choices and this is what happens. There's these assumptions. And then values, I think going back to, when I think about, our tribal college campuses and universities, the values are all women, all men, children, our two-spirit relatives, LGBTQ relatives are sacred, valued, are worthy of autonomy and body sovereignty. And then when we look at, more of a patriarchal society where, anyone who doesn't identify, who aren't, men, are kind of the property. And even though we know that, there is no property anymore, these assumptions and values just still continuously percolate and circle around. They just take place differently. It might not be legal to, sexually assault your wife, but then there might be cultural norms and assumptions that, still, give the message that, wives are men's property, and that, so these things are, while we know that there's, some legal changes and those might influence rape culture, we know that, it's also media, it's also some assumptions, values, that kind of perpetuate that. And then I just want to say it's just not, not traditional for many of our communities that sexual assault was not, it was not traditional in the sense that, just wasn't tolerated. There was accountability for that. And I think right now, especially with just some changes to campus policies, we saw kind of that going back where, accountability are those who sexually assault, on campus, will there be accountability? And so, that's something that we have to think about. And I think as students, we are, I say I'm not a student anymore, but as a student, I remember I was in college for many, many years. I remember my advisor was like, you have to get out of here. You can't keep staying in school, because I love school. But, as a student, I know that we can influence change. We can really say, this is not, what we want on our campus. This is not what we want to be a part of our campus. And like I said, I think our tribal colleges and universities, the greatest strength that we have are our traditional values and beliefs, and what guides us through. So I think, one of these, it's always that walking in two worlds, I think, where we have, some influence from, the outside of our communities, and then we have ours. And so I think when I talk about rape culture, I want to say that, it could look very different on our tribal colleges and universities, that, it might not be exactly what we see through, media and through movies, that it might not look like that. And so we really have to think about, what does it look like on our campus? And I think students, when the risks, what are the risks of sexual assault? Is it, it might not necessarily be the frat parties, or it might not be, in college dorms. It might be somewhere somewhere else. It might be certain times and certain places, and you'll know that. And your input and your sharing of that information to those who do create policy and do create, that response for sexual assault, that's valuable for them to know. It's valuable for them to know, what does what if rape culture, if that is perpetuating sexual violence on your campus, what does that look like? And where do you see it? And how do we challenge that? So it's just important to know that. Next slide, please. So this, even though this is from 1997, I think it's still very relevant, in that I know, the critical role that friends have. And so if we look on this chart here, there's the dark red is who helped a person who has been sexually assaulted and who they told. And we see for friends, they helped and who they told. That number is huge, who they told and who helped them. So that is a critical role that we have to our friends, who have been sexually assaulted. They're more likely to come to us and tell us, and we're more in that role of helping them. And so when I think about this, then why I felt this was an important topic to talk about and to have for this project, for our tribal college campus project, it is because I know friends are the number one, person that most likely, and faculty and staff also, I think, is another important piece that's not really on this list here. This is more of the community. And I would be curious to see what it looks like on campus. But, I think overall friends, for sure, we know are going to be the first people that people tell, those who have been sexually assaulted tell. And it's so I want to provide, some guidance and just some information for you to have as a friend on campus of what to do and how to help. So I think this is a critical chart. Next slide, please. So this is from endrapeoncampus.org. And I think as a student, or even, if you are, you work on a campus, that this is a great resource to have and to really get out to students and let them have this information, or provide this information for them. But this is how to respond when a friend discloses, and this is some of the guidance that they had, and it's listen without judgment. So the story that I had told previously of my friend was like, why didn't you say anything? While I know there was no judgment, it felt like there was judgment. So we want to listen without judgment. And again, going back to some of that rape culture, those assumptions that are very prevalent in media, social media, in, movies, pop culture, things like that, that while we don't intentionally to have judgment, it can come out. We are influenced by, media and pop culture, and influenced by all these things. So even though we might not, consciously be judging, it might come out, that way. There might be a look on our face, or, our body language. And so we really want to listen with a very neutral but compassionate, way about listening. We don't want judgment. We want to believe them. I think, as an advocate, this is the number one thing: believe them. This is huge. And I think this is why a lot of students don't disclose. It is why it's very traumatizing to, report a sexual assault, because it's often, there's often this belief that they're making it up. that, no, this really is this what happened? Like, you were there, you decided to go up to their room, you know, and that just, it can really create that trauma response of shutting down and being closed off. Believing them is number one, and you want to express that. You want to express, I believe you, you want to make sure that they know that you believe them. And with trauma, we know, maybe they're sharing their story. Maybe they are telling you, look, this is what happened last night. And I don't know exactly what happened. I don't know exactly, if this is sexual assault, but this is my experience. And this is something, it's bothering me. And you want to let them know you believe them, that you believe whatever they are telling you happened. And that belief is, will be unwavered. So, I think this is that big piece. As an advocate, this is why it's so critical to have advocates on campus or to have close relationships with an advocate, that, that belief and that that very biased support will just mean so much. So I can't emphasize one thing enough. It's believing them first and foremost. And then validating how they're feeling. I think, especially with trauma and especially, those impacts again, validating their anger, validating their sadness, validating, some might just be completely, even though it looks like they're not impacted, that still is a trauma response. And I can't remember what movie or what show it was, Netflix. I keep referring to media, and this is how, how important media is in pop culture and movies, because it can either sway us into going into that judgment phase, that, victim blaming, or it could give us tools of, oh, this is how, it's experienced. But I can't remember this movie and it's going to bother me. But, it did a great job of showing, different women who were sexually assaulted, and they each had a very different way that they responded. They had a very different way that their trauma looked. And one was more believable, one was able to, completely tell their story without any gaps, without, any, it seemed like any emotional attachment to it. But when you looked closer and when you saw they had trauma, that there was impacts, but they were more believable. So I think it's important to know that however they're feeling is valid, and that no matter how they're feeling, you believe them, so it just, those two can go hand in hand, and validation is key, especially when we think about safety and a sense of safety. When someone is sexually assaulted, that safety can be, that feeling of having control, and that sense of safety can be diminished. And if no one is validating their feelings, that can create a response where they feel like they're in, they need to get in survivor mode, and that that there's danger, so I think validating feelings is very important. And this, I think it's really important when someone's sharing and they're sharing how they're feeling, for us not to bring attention to how we're feeling with that. And it's very hard, because I think that's a human piece to also feel. And this will go into how to take care of yourself and your spirit as well. But I think it's really important to validate how they're feeling, and then support their decisions. So if they don't want to report, you want to support that. And of course, support their decisions. And at the end of the day, they are the ones that have to live with those decisions. They are the ones who, they have the right and the autonomy, and they have that right to make their own decisions. I think, this is something, when I was an advocate, and something that was hard for me, to kind of think about was, well, that's not what I would do. And I don't think that's the best thing for you. And you have to throw that whole idea of that out the door, that they know what's best for them. And I think our job as friends, our job as advocates, our job as someone who is supporting someone who has been sexually assaulted, our job really is to inform them of all the resources, all of what they have, so that their decisions can be informed, right? So we're not here saying, you need to report, and if they decide not to, we just want to give them, here's your option. Here, you can report this, and this might be why you'd want to report this, things like that. We want to provide information, but we don't want to impose what we think they should do, because then that goes back to that control, that feeling, that sense of safety and sense of control. It's going to put them in a place where they might feel like they're in danger. So as a friend, we really want to think about that. And then we want to understand that this is their story to tell, that it's not, they are trusting you with something that is just horrific, something that has happened that was horrific. And we want to understand that that's their story to tell. It's not ours to tell. It's not our, our story to move forward and say what needs to happen at the end of that story or during that story. We just want to understand that this is theirs and that they trusted you with this, and you're really in a position that they trusted you. And then how do you move forward, and how do you help them through that? So these are things to, just think about. I think as long as you listen, especially without judgment, you believe and you validate and you support and understand, that will go a long, long way. And I guess I'll stop here for a brief second just to see if anyone has questions or thoughts or concerns. Kind of like to break it up, just give anyone a moment. Okay, I'll just keep my eye on the chat box here. Next slide, please, Novi. So a big part of sexual assault, responding to sexual assault on campus, there's a bystander intervention. I don't know if anyone's aware of the Green Dot curriculum, or has implemented that on their tribal college campus. But intervening, it's one response that colleges have taken to respond to sexual assault. And there was actually some new research that kind of came out that it addressed the impact of intervention and things like that. And if you are interested in that article, you can email me and I can send it to you. But really, I think the number one thing is safety. If you see something and it looks like sexual violence, intervene if you safely can. And with this, it's just not physical safety, but I even think about just a sense of social safety. I think what that safety is, and how you safely can do it without posing harm to you and someone who is potentially being sexually assaulted. So when you think about intervening, if you see something, say something. It's kind of like when you see that on the airport where there's signs everywhere. If you see something, say something. And that's kind of what this bystander intervention is, that you intervene. If you see something, you intervene. So just thinking about that, you need to determine safely what that means, how, and I think for students, this is a great opportunity if you are really interested in, maybe creating a prevention program, or you're interested in this. Please feel free to reach out to me. I can send you some information on bystander intervention. And I think one of the biggest keys here is sometimes it doesn't really relate to specifically to tribal colleges and universities, some of the curriculums that are out there or the guidance. So we can, we don't have to create a whole new thing, but we can see how it will fit within your campus. So if you want to reach out to me and intervention is something that you want to do, something you see is a critical need on your campus, please feel free and reach out to me. I can work with, with this grant, all tribal colleges and campuses, and that includes if you're a student, please feel free to reach out to me as well. But anyway, so going back to intervention, notice and be aware of the signs of sexual assault. I think this is a big piece. And this is something that I think is going to be important for students to know where to find their sexual assault policies, where to find, how does the campus define sexual assault, and what, constitutes that. And I think it's even further that we also need to be providing a little bit more in-depth trainings, or just even, presentations for students to know, because you can read something that says sexual assault, but it's, there's a lot of context that goes into it. There's a lot of things, I think a great example of this is when I took my first sexual assault training. It was through Red Wind's Sexual Assault Training Institute, Mercedes. And I remember just going more in depth of what sexual assault was. And it was really hard for me because there were a lot of things that happened that I did not think was sexual assault. I did not define it as that. And after that training, that veil was completely taken off, and it was, really, really hard to think about, wow, that was sexual assault. And I didn't even think that was. So, I think we have, our policies and procedures, and we have our definitions of what sexual assault is, but I think there really is a critical need to talk about it in a way that provides context and provides, dynamics of sexual assault that, we don't necessarily think about, and I think this kind of goes back to that social media, the pop culture media, TV, television, movies. There's always this, we think about, and a great example is stranger rape, that it's for most of TV and television and movies, it's always a stranger that, perpetrates sexual assault. And we know that is not the case, that that students, that, those who are sexually assaulted are most likely to be sexually assaulted by someone they know, an acquaintance, a friend, someone that they know. And, not to say that it doesn't happen, that, a complete stranger does not sexually assault. That happens. It just is not, statistically, that's not what we see happens often. So, thinking about that, and when we go into these assumptions and beliefs that we talked about, rape culture, that's kind of what this is. This is how that all gets wrapped up in a bow. That we kind of have these assumptions about sexual assault, and it's not because we're just, we're intentionally wanting to perpetuate and continue these, myths and falsehoods. It's just that's what we see. That's what we see as what is being defined as sexual assault. And so I think it really is important when we are talking about bystander intervention, when we're talking about students, taking action and intervening, we really, really, really have to make sure that they notice and are aware of what sexual assault is. And that we are providing that information so that they know. And then I think also you just go with your gut. There are a lot of things, I remember being young and things that weren't comfortable for me that you see, and that you're like, this isn't right. I think your gut is mostly right in those situations. So then you have to think about, how do you intervene in a safe way? How do you make it safe, for you and that person who is potentially being sexually assaulted? And then again, if help is needed, determine how you'll intervene. So again, how are you going to do this? What are the resources? Who do you reach out to? And then, take action, that action piece. And there was a lot. So I think one thing that comes to mind is that kind of this campaign, and you see it a lot, where there's like posters or, just some like some videos that are shared that's geared towards students, that one of them is a group of guys and someone's being very, not respecting consent. And then a friend, one of the guy friends, says, hey, just basically calls him out on his behavior. And so that's one way, that's one way to do that. And, going back to some of the data and research, we know that, that social influence is big, that, that's a big key in changing and ending sexual assault. So intervening it doesn't even have to be, it doesn't necessarily have to be what we think it is, it could be very much a friend challenging just some comments that are very, that victim blame or that are inappropriate or that, insinuate and perpetuate sexual assault. So it can be a lot of those things. And then address your friend's safety, addressing their safety. So if you respond, and let's say it's an intimate partner and you respond, is this going to put them in more danger when you're not there? Thinking about that. And then, it might be good to have a conversation with your friend about, some safe words that if you're uncomfortable, what is our safe word to get out of here? Just thinking about that. So these are just some ways. And if you're interested as a student and you want to know more about how you can, possibly, take action and create an intervention program on campus, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm here and we can work that out. And it's key, I think, to ending, kind of that culture around sexual assault. Next slide, please. This is a big one, I think, especially with vicarious trauma and secondary trauma. When someone discloses that they've been sexually assaulted, it can impact us. And I think a really great book that I read by Louise Erdrich, the Red House, I think that's what it is. It's been a while since I read it, but it really shows the impact of sexual assault, not just on the person who was sexually assaulted, but their family and community around. And I think that, you really have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself as well, that you want to make sure that you're taking care of your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being in that process, that in order to show up for your friend who has been sexually assaulted, you want to make sure that you are taking care of yourself as well, so that you can show up and be that person for your friend, but you're also, you are taking care of yourself. And so a lot of this, and we know that when there's a stress or trauma, when there's that impact, we know that movement of any kind, whatever your ability is, that movement can really kind of close that stress cycle. It doesn't make it go away, but it kind of helps regulate your, all of those hormones that we're pumping through, like the cortisol and all of the physiological responses that stress and trauma has. When you're moving, it can kind of help regulate that. So whatever that looks like for you, it could be, if walking, doing yoga, running, dancing, it can look like anything. And if, that's not the ability that walking is not something that you can do, it could be just, doing some movement in your chair, doing some stretching, whatever that looks like for you. Any type of movement is important. And then again, with mental well-being, I think this is something I think is important for students who have been sexually assaulted is, taking a class you've been wanting to take, but you haven't. It could be that pottery class, or it could be, one of those, they always talk about the basket weaving classes, but, if it's something you've been wanting to take and if you have the ability to, and the resources, I encourage you to do that. Listen and read content that replenishes your mind. So, reading, one thing I've been really horrible at doing in the past for myself, and just recently, is reading the news before bed. And I've noticed that it really doesn't calm me, and I end up having a harder time falling asleep. So, it was a reminder that I need to take care of my mental well-being and read something that replenishes me, that gives me, good energy to end my day with. learning something new. These are all things that kind of help that mental capacity, that mental space. And then emotional well-being, that could be journaling, practicing positive self-talk, and being around people who make you feel good. And, just kind of being around those who support your emotional well-being. And then spiritual well-being, I think this is key. If it's your tradition, smudging, or whatever traditional medicines that you have, gather traditional medicines, go to ceremony if you are able to, connect with elders. This might look very different. It might be, there's traditional healing, and then there's also other avenues. But, and I think our tribal colleges and universities are a great resource and a great, just a great space that, you might want to think about utilizing, that you want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself so that you can show up for your friends who need you. Next slide, please. So prevention work. So I think for students, you might not even be necessarily responding or helping a friend who's been sexually assaulted. You might just say, look, I've had friends who've been sexually assaulted. I've had family members. I've had, I know that it impacts our communities, and I want to be involved in my role as a student. And there are ways that you can do that. You can find a campus club or program that works to end sexual violence on campus. And if you don't have one, look to, how do I create one? How do I put one together? Implementing your own, finding someone on campus who can support you in that work. It might be, a guide, a counselor on campus. It might be the Title IX investigator who might, be able to lead you in the right direction. It might be student services, or a cultural center. It might be anything like that you might think about. Planning a sexual assault awareness campaigns on campus. One of the first sexual assault events that I ever attended was when I was on campus, and it was the Take Back the Night campaign. And it really brought a lot of people, it educated, a lot of people, a lot of students, faculty and staff, anybody, even in the community. It was a great way to bring awareness to it. So if you, as a student, you might want to plan one of those. It's April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So, as you think about this new school year, it might be something that you might want to plan, something to think about. Creating peer support programs for victims, survivors of sexual assault. This is a big one, I think, because I think for students, youth, and even we see in a lot of our a lot of social service programs, peer support is incredibly helpful. It's incredibly, we see most helpful in some ways. So, thinking about how to create support programs for victims and survivors of sexual assault, that's peer support, so if let's say you have an advocacy program, or you have a program that helps respond to sexual assault, and they don't have a peer support program, think about how you can. There are some trainings, and if you're interested, I don't have it on the top of my head, but there's some organizations, I don't know if it's NRAPE on campus, but there are organizations that provide trainings for students who want to create, or who want to provide peer support. Again, a lot of, and how our project works is, we know that there aren't a lot of tribal specific, trainings, campus trainings, tribal specific, curriculums, but we're here to help you. If there's one that you find, or a training, or if there's something that you find that you think would be important to attend, we're here to help you figure out how can you make this relevant on your campus? How can you make this work? A sexual assault awareness campaign, Take Back the Night, might not be the most efficient, most appropriate campaign for your campus and your community. So then we can think about something else in that realm, So just thinking about that, we're here to help you. If there's something that you are, you want to talk through, I'm here, and I'm here to help you make sure that it is relevant for your campus. Because I do know we don't have, unfortunately, a lot of Native specific resources out there. And that's why I think it's great that OVW has, given us the opportunity here at Redwind to, help you navigate that in your on your campus. So, and then, so the peer support program, if it might be something that's of an interest to you, then, I think that'd be great. And you can reach out to me and I can let you know. I can't remember who it's through though, but I can find that. And then have education booths at sporting events, campus events, just bringing that awareness, education, that's key. You can have resources, and that will be so helpful. And then bringing in experts to present or talk on your campus. I was lucky enough where I was able to see Tarana Burke, the person who brought the Me Too movement, who had birthed that, and I was able to listen to her on campus. My campus had brought her in, and I was able to listen to her. So you want to bring in people, if you want to bring anyone, I'm thinking like Sarah Deer, you might, want to think about, as a student, you might want to see, how do I organize that? Who could I go to think about, is this possible? Just thinking about that. These are great ways, great prevention opportunities that you can take as a student. I think students are, you all are incredibly brilliant, and you are the leaders in this movement. So, and on your campus. So if there's any way I can support you or support, even staff, then I'm here to offer that. Next slide, please. So just, for students, you want to know your campus resources. So you want to know, do you have a sexual assault nurse examiner? If not, who is in your community? Who's the closest one to you? Is there a great relationship between the campus and a sexual assault nurse examiner? You want to know who the confidential advocates are. Unfortunately, not all tribal colleges and universities have the ability to have an advocate on campus. So, it might be a community-based advocate, a local advocate. You want to know who they are. And confidential is, a key, because on campus, through Title IX and through the Clery Act and through, it just depends on the campus policy, but some, you might want to know who's a confidential person. So, if you disclose to a faculty, a teacher, let's say faculty or professor, and they are mandated to report through their campus policies, you might want to know that. So you want to know who's confidential. A community-based advocate, they will have the ability to be, confidential. They, what goes in there stays in there. They don't report. So you want to know who those advocates are. You want to know who you report a sexual assault to, when. So I think another piece for Title IX mostly investigate, sexual assaults that have happened on campus or at an event that was campus sponsored or things like that. You want to know who to report that to, if they want to report, and what that looks like. And then community resources, who to report in the community if that needs to happen. And then where to find your victim survivor rights, student rights. So Know Your 9 is a great place to go. I put some resources on here as well for you, but that's a great place to find your rights. And then knowing just what your campus, what they're obligated to accommodate victims and survivors of sexual assault. That could mean, a new dorm, a new, anything that might be, you might want to know to help your friend who's experienced sexual assault or who's been sexually assaulted. And then campus security. If you have campus security, you want to know, their number, how to reach them. And then counseling services. You want to know, where to access those resources. And I didn't put on here, but I think it's really important, or, some of those cultural supports, those supports are important as well to know. So just things that you want to know. And I think it's really important for campus faculty, for, the campus to provide this information for students somehow, whether it's through a student handbook on your website, or even you can create, a little brochure or something highlighting all of this information so that students have it available to them. Next slide, please. And so these again are the resources. Know Your 9 is a great one, and Rape on Campus. The Strong Hearts Native Helpline, you can call or go on to their website and find resources. And then the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network, RAIN. I didn't put on here, but the National Sexual Violence Resource Center is a great one to find resources. And another one, I think, especially for youth, is Love is Respect. I feel like they changed their name, but I'm not sure. But Love is Respect, that's a great one as well. These are all great, resources to have as students, to just have, and, if you need it, or just, just to get more information on sexual assault and resources and impacts of sexual assault. And there a lot of these websites have, a section for friends, family, for, how to support their friends. So definitely look into these. And I know we'll have a tribal college campus specific website soon. It's in the process of just some final touches, and then it will be live, and I can let you all know when that is, and we'll have resources on there for you as well to look for. So it's good to have these resources. Next slide, please. I think the next slide is just some of those cited works. Again, going back to, there's a campus sexual violence statistics from from RAIN. Great information for you to have, especially if you have those education booths. You want to pull some statistics out there. That's a great place. The same thing with End Rape on Campus. There's survivor resources, and then the NIJ report. That's great information and a great report to have. And then those suggested policies and procedures, campus sexual assault, in the American Association of University Professors. While some of their, those suggested policies might not be compatible with tribal colleges and universities, it's still, something just to look at and think about and get some ideas. Next slide, please. This is where you can reach me, Raquel, at redwind.net. You can email me, or you can email Hanovi. I always forget my phone number because I am not in the office, but it goes directly to my phone. So, if you, email, I think is the best way to reach me. So if you have any questions or comments, any lingering thoughts that you have, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm here. If you have ideas that you have, and you want to just see, how to get that going, I'm here. And just know that, as friends, we are truly, the best. We are a great support for our friends who have been sexually assaulted. And so I really want to thank you all for being here, and just know that take care of yourself as well in the process. So with that, if anybody has questions, please feel free. Other than that, this presentation's over.
All right, thank you, Raquel. Before we end the session, I want to let you all know that there will be an eval popping up once Zoom closes. We'd love to hear what you thought, so if you're able to fill that out, we'd very much appreciate it. In closing, I'd like to thank our presenter, Raquel, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. I hope you all stay safe, and I hope to see you all at the next webinar.
Thank you, Hanovi.